Hi, welcome to the show. Well, we have a new deputy FBI director in Dan Bongino, the right-wing podcaster whose prime qualification appears to be sort of owning the libs and presumably, they would claim, ending the weaponization at the FBI. Now, late last week, Attorney General Pam Bondi was also talking about the weaponization of the DOJ more broadly. This time in a conversation with Ted Cruz, claiming that it was actually worse than she had thought.
So let me ask you, 2 weeks into it, you've been at DOJ. What's your assessment? Is it as bad as you thought it would be? Is it better? Is it worse?
It's worse. Of course, it's no worse.
You inherited chaos.
Worse meaning, that department had completely lost its mission of fighting violent crime. Look what they did to President Trump. Look at the weaponization, and weaponization ended. And the deep state is very real. I think all of you.
All right, that's what I'm going to be talking about on this show. I supported Attorney General Bondi's confirmation. I have known and liked and respected her for years. And while I've had concerns about some of the positions she took, particularly in trying to help President Trump's legal effort to overturn the 2020 election, the president gets to pick his cabinet, and the standards should be high to deny confirmation. But this notion that the Biden DOJ was weaponized or politicized has become such orthodoxy among Republican political leaders, and by the way, even among some independents. But what if it's all BS? What if it's all provably false? Look, it seems that it's the qualification for Dan Bongino, right? And it also seems it was the only real qualification for Kash Patel to lead the FBI, that he was, again, going to end the weaponization.
Senator, this may be one of the scenarios that most uniquely qualifies me to take command at the FBI. Having been the victim of government overreach and a weaponized system of justice and law enforcement, I know what it feels like to have the full weight of the United States government barreling down on you.
Now, his nomination I did not support. But what if basically none of the arguments they have made about weaponization of the Biden DOJ are true? Doesn't that change everything? Suddenly, the Patel appointment, the Bongino appointment make no sense because there's no excuse to clean house at the DOJ. Now, when I make that comment, it initially leads many on the right's heads to explode, including people who I know and like and respect. But then, when I produce the receipts, it gets harder to be mad. And today I am going to do that. I'm going to go through all their arguments and show you why they don't hold up, and then I'll take your calls. I'm going to show you why it's BS that the Biden DOJ was weaponized. Now, there's now a so-called weaponization working group to investigate former special counsel Jack Smith, who brought the federal criminal charges against Trump over his role in January 6th, and another on Trump's obstruction of justice in connection with the mishandling of the classified documents. AG Bondi directed the group to, quote, examine federal cooperation with the weaponization in connection with the criminal hush money case brought by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as well, and the civil fraud lawsuit against Trump and his family businesses brought by Attorney General Letitia James that resulted in that judge ordering the huge civil judgment. Now, I was very much opposed to the local criminal case brought by Alvin Bragg. Those of you who follow this show will know that. But that doesn't change the reality that the supposed DOJ, not Manhattan DA, DOJ weaponization just isn't backed up by the facts. So let's start with the numbers. By our count, there were 11 major Republicans nationwide who were either publicly investigated or indicted by the Biden Department of Justice. And during that same span, there were 12 major Democrats across the country publicly investigated or indicted by the feds. Okay, now, that doesn't necessarily prove the point. But the fact that it's roughly even offers context to start the conversation. And by the way, those Democrats also cried politicization of the DOJ, even when it didn't make sense. Most recently, from convicted former Senator Bob Menendez, who was sentenced to 11 years after being convicted on 18 counts of corruption-related offenses. After his sentence was handed down, this is what he said.
This whole process has been nothing but a political witch hunt by the Justice Department's NSD.
And he isn't the only Democrat to claim the Biden DOJ was weaponized against them. Former Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, a Democrat, convicted last year on multiple perjury charges related to a false mortgage application. She claimed the Biden DOJ targeted her because she too aggressively fought for racial justice.
I have done things as a prosecutor that a lot of other prosecutors have not done in this country, whether that is holding police accountable when a lot of other prosecutors in this country would not do so, whether that is ending the war on drugs, which we know was a war on black people in the city of Baltimore.
Oh, right. It was all about the Biden DOJ's racism. These political leaders are always the victims of racism or politics or anything but the actual crime being investigated or charged. T.J. Cox, a former Democratic congressman from California, charged in 2022 on 28 counts related to wire fraud and money laundering. He, too, claimed he was a victim of political prosecution. This month, he accepted a plea deal, pled guilty to 2 of the counts, will be sentenced in June. Former Missouri Democratic Congressman Cori Bush, investigated for alleged misuse of campaign funds, claimed that the investigation against her by the Biden DOJ was being powered by mysterious right-wing forces. New York City Mayor Eric Adams, same song. Hunter Biden's lawyer argued his prosecution was political, that Hunter Biden was a victim of, quote, selective prosecution. And by the way, even President Biden himself, when pardoning Hunter, claimed his own DOJ was politicized, singling out Hunter, quote, was raw politics. He says that, quote, has infected this process and it led to a miscarriage of justice. One after the other, they blame the system, they claim it's politics, it's not evidence, it's not actions. And while the subjects of the investigations complain on both sides, the broader criticism and whining has mostly come from the right. Former FBI Director Chris Wray, appointed by President Trump at a Senate hearing in 2023, pointed out that as a, quote, lifelong Republican, the idea that he was leading a politicized FBI made no sense. Of course it doesn't. And in another hearing in 2022, he responded to one of the talking points, one of the arguments, that the FBI had been targeting pro-life protesters, pointing out that more of their investigations were actually on the other side.
Now, we have quite a number of investigations as we speak into attacks or threats against pregnancy resource centers, faith-based organizations, and other pro-life organizations. And you might be interested to know that since the Dobbs Act decision, probably in the neighborhood of 70% of our abortion-related violence cases or threats cases are cases of violence or threats against pro-life. It's where the victims are pro-life organizations.
Oh, but that doesn't fit in with the narrative. They also cite the January 6th cases, claiming that many or most of the defendants got the book thrown at them compared to other cases, particularly compared to the 2020 protesters in the wake of the death of George Floyd. Except that there were tens of thousands of people protesting on January 6th. Only 1,600 got criminally charged. Only those who went inside the Capitol building or attacked officers. There were thousands more who went onto the restricted perimeter on the Capitol grounds when the fencing and the barricades were breached and who were not prosecuted, even though they technically violated the law. As for the summer of 2020 rioters, it was Trump's AG, Bill Barr, who led the federal prosecutions. Thousands were arrested. And yes, some had charges dropped based on lack of evidence, or in certain cases, maybe they shouldn't have dropped the charges. But an Associated Press comparison of charges against January 6th protesters and BLM rioters published in June of 2021 found, quote, in more than 300 federal cases stemming from the protests sparked by George Floyd's death, dozens of people charged have been convicted of serious crimes and sent to prison. More than 120 defendants across the United States have pleaded guilty or were convicted at trial of federal crimes, including rioting, arson, conspiracy. Quote, more than 70 defendants got an average of about 2 years and 3 months behind bars. 10 of them received prison terms of 5 years or more. At least 1,284 felony cases were brought as a result. Again, with some getting serious prison time. And that says nothing, by the way, about any state charges that were filed. So the argument that on the whole, the January 6th criminals were targeted while the summer rioters all got off doesn't fly. I'm going to take your calls on this in a minute, 866-967-6887. What about the DOJ supposedly targeting parents protesting at school boards? That's been a consistent argument from leaders on the right. This is Congressman Jim Jordan.
The Biden administration wanted to go after parents. They needed a pretext to do it. And oh, shazam, here comes a letter from the School Boards Association. And 22 days later, they're sending out an email to agents around the country saying, treat parents as domestic terrorists, use this threat tag, put that label on moms and dads.
Except that's not true. The main talking point there is with regard to a letter from the National School Boards Association issued in 2021, warning of threats to school board members and describing it as akin to domestic terrorism. Now, that organization, the NSBA, later apologized for the language, but here's the most important point. The Justice Department never used that language or endorsed it. In fact, AG Garland said he disagreed with it. And an investigation determined that there was no direct or indirect evidence suggesting the administration requested the letter or specified, edited, or reviewed the contents of it before it was sent or otherwise requested it be written. And no parent was prosecuted by the DOJ as a domestic terrorist. By the way, one of the parents cited in a report by House Republicans suggesting she was improperly investigated came from a November 2021 meeting of the Brighton, Michigan School Board, where the mom said, and I quote, "We're coming for you. Take it as a threat. Call the FBI. I don't care. You're all either going to be recalled or we're all coming from you. Sorry, we're all coming for you. That's what's happening." Not fair to ask questions there, that's all. But finally, the biggest gripe is the prosecution of Donald Trump. This, they say, shows how the DOJ went after their political opponent. Now, this completely ignores the reality that Attorney General Merrick Garland initially refused to prosecute Trump for January 6th. He clearly didn't want to do it, despite lots of complaining from the left. And if he had done it, by the way, when they had wanted in 2021, those cases would have been resolved well before the election. So if the goal was, quote, election interference, boy, did they screw it up. Of course, what ultimately forced Garland's hand wasn't the left. It was the Trump lies about the classified documents at his house. Trump never would have been prosecuted if he and his team didn't lie about the sensitive documents he had at Mar-a-Lago. Unlike Joe Biden and Mike Pence, who gave full access to search and recover any documents, the Trump team had particularly sensitive ones, which they lied to the FBI about. They were asked for all documents with classified markings. So whatever level of classification the documents had at that time, I don't think there's any question, but that's one of the arguments. The Trump team promised there were no other documents marked classified. That was a lie. How is it weaponized to say that's a real problem? It was only then that Garland appointed a special prosecutor to investigate. And by the way, also a Republican one to investigate Biden. Special counsel Jack Smith made the decision to prosecute for January 6th, not Garland. And it's not comparable to anything Biden or Pence did. But regardless of the legalities, Trump did do something wrong in his efforts to overturn the election and in lying about the document. You can argue about whether he should have been charged. In fact, I was supportive of Merrick Garland for not charging Trump initially for January 6th. But Jack Smith would have had a strong legal case, at least on some of the charges. And here's a larger point that is too often ignored. Every single FBI director in American history has been a Republican. One became independent, but not one Democrat, not one ever. The argument that the Biden DOJ was weaponized just isn't supported by the facts. It's BS. It was BS when the Democrats who were charged alleged it, and it was BS when the Republicans did too. So spare us the victimhood. Please, please focus on the future. Focus on trying to keep us safe. Focus on prosecuting bad guys, not creating boogeymen to try to justify the unjustifiable. And without that, I don't see how you can justify Dan Bongino or Kash Patel, by the way.